Yeah, so critical, urgent, and important was something that I picked up at West Point. As you said, it really helped me come into a new job and get the lay of the land because when you're the new athletic director or the new deputy or the new football coach at a new place, everything is really important. But what I learned through the military lens is everything's important in that role too, but you have to be able to delegate. And so the leader, the general, the athletic director, the chancellor, we need to focus on what's critical. And I would say in the world of college athletics, what we used to deem critical has now fallen to just being important, whether that's APR, graduation rates. And so you have to delegate those things to others because what's critical right now is coming up with a national standard that will protect fair play, continue to have young people graduate, protect them, help them invest their new financial gains in positive ways. And so that's what the athletic director role for me is: handle those critical things and then surround myself with other people who can take care of the important things at the end of the day.
Welcome to Higher Ed Athletics, presented by AD Vantage. This conversation with TCU Athletic Director Mike Buddie was from my recent road trip to Oklahoma and Texas when I stopped in and visited with Mike and got a tour of TCU's facilities. And I want to thank AD Vantage and Pilotics. They funded that trip so that you could have conversations like this brought to you on Higher Ed Athletics. So thank you to both of them for continuing to be sponsors all year for Higher Ed Athletics. And welcome inside the Game One studio. This conversation with Mike Buddie starts discussing the transition from Army to TCU and why he decided to opt in to the chaos 18 months ago, and how he leaned on some AD colleagues to understand if he wanted to even pursue jobs away from West Point, and how he kept a pulse and opinion on the changes that he maybe wasn't experiencing at Army, since he knew that would come up in interviews if he decided to leave. There's an emphasis on how the department stays creative in today's environment and why Mike actually thinks the current environment allows paralysis by analysis to be a thing of the past, and instead departments can make decisions more freely. Buddie shares how he works to be aligned with the chancellor by speaking the same languages in speeches, meetings, and at events. Those that watch the show for a long time know I think this is very important to start thinking about what your president thinks and how you operate like a president. And Mike talks about the early days in between getting that job and the introductory press conference, about 10 days, and how he hit the phones to talk to important stakeholders, donors, and TCU staffers before the news was broke by Pete Thamel on New Year's Eve. Buddie also talks candidly as a traditional AD, how there can be frustrations if someone feels like they got passed up for a job, but including the idea of outside industry hires, and he gives some advice on how to maybe protect against that. So whether you're watching or listening, make sure you subscribe to Higher Ed Athletics, sign up on the newsletter on higheredathletics.com, make sure you're subscribing to things like the Modern AD and the Mid-Major AD, and I thank you for your continued support of Higher Ed Athletics. Okay, so Mike, you came from Army to TCU. I would say two very impressive institutions for very different missions. So whenever you kind of transition from an Army, West Point to a Texas Christian University, how does an athletic director learn that new mission and culture? And then how do you kind of apply that through your lens as an AD whenever you step foot on this campus?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, West Point has a very unique mission. More other than Air Force and Navy, there's really nothing comparable. And so for me, making that transition to TCU, I think to me there's two stages. One is a lot of the prep for interview. At least my approach is to dig into what is the mission, what is the culture, what is the written strategy, whether that's through a strategic plan or the chancellor's key initiatives, et cetera, and spend a lot of time studying it and thinking through, okay, does this really align with what I believe and what I'm comfortable with? And then once you get the job and you physically get to campus, you get a chance to see, okay, is the strategic plan and the mission just something that lives on a website, or do you actually feel it and sense it? And so when I got to TCU from Army, it was certainly a different mission, but similar to most of the ones in higher ed, whether it was Wake Forest or Furman, where I worked previously. But what I liked about TCU that was unique is it's a living, breathing commitment. And my arrival at TCU coincided with the arrival of a new chancellor, and so he's been giving me the opportunity to hear a lot of his speaking engagements. We've done a lot of traveling together, and so what I like to do is to echo a lot of the same language, so that the little tidbits that he's talking about, whether that's community engagement, whether that's being student-centered growth, phrases like that that are part of what our mission is. To see the athletic director using the same language as the chancellor, I think is a really good optic and a really important thing. So to me, there's the part of studying it on paper and then seeing it, living it, breathing it, and reciting it.
Yeah, I've noticed. So some of my background is after I got out of college athletics, I left higher ed for a little bit, but then I spent a year working for Pam Whitten at IU, the university president. And what I told people since then is it was almost like a master class in understanding what a college president deals with every day. And what I've noticed is like that alignment, the FBS AD position is, me and Brian Blair had talked about this when he was at Toledo, is it's kind of evolving public facing, at least, of the president. You're not able to be in the day to day as much. You still know what's going on, but you have to rely on your staff. But at the same time, you're given more talks. Probably you're coming up with the, not maybe speeches, but at least remarks to stay on theme. I like that you mentioned that you've been with your chancellor, because I think that's like the new trend is you all have to show that alignment, right? Because that's really the changing position, in my opinion.
Well, you're exactly right, Travis. And our new chancellor has identified athletics as one of the 4 key pillars to the success of the next 20 years of TCU as an institution, not just as an athletics department. So, alignment can be spoken or can be shown. And what I love about what we're doing here at TCU is it's shown. We do travel together, and there are just certain things where you just get a sense of like, I can't explain it, but I feel like they're aligned. And that's when you travel together, when we're both doing podcasts and using the same language, those are those intangible things that really illustrate, I think, true alignment.
Are your campus mental health services enough? Will your athletes trust to visit them on site? Consider supplemental mental health care through OnRise. It starts at $94.30 per athlete per year. That's $7.86 a month and 26 cents a day. Mental health care should belong to the whole roster, and with OnRise, it does. Visit onrise.care to learn more, and while you're there, check out their library of articles and resources. So, the other thing about being new, I always try to bring some tactical strategy to not just deputy ADs, but really current ADs that, like yourself, that leave an institution. But whenever you get somewhere new, part of my background was doing briefings, working with foundations to do briefings on, people that the president would meet with. Thinking about as an athletic director right now, ADs, it's whenever you're going to a new place, you're going to know who some of the donors are, right? But like, you also are going to have meetings with maybe people that have never considered donating to a TCU. So whenever you get here, what's kind of your first approach once I don't even know if you're settled yet, but like, how are you kind of creating that list and putting it on your calendar of who do I need to reach out to? How are you trying to find those pockets of potential people that are already attached to you, but also maybe some new people as well?
Well, there's a multifaceted approach. I rely heavily on our external group. So, Ryan Peck, our Chief Revenue Officer, Jay Fields, who's our Horned Frogs Sports Properties Learfield partner, and then Joe Foley was in charge of the Frog Club when I got here. Now it's Alex Yak. But I from the time that I was offered the job up to the press conference, which was about a 10-day period, those are great opportunities to reach out. And so they had a binder prepared for me, whether it was key corporate sponsors, key personal donors, key business contacts. And then, of course, I went to the chancellor directly as well and said, hey, who are the 10 people? And those are almost always board of trustee members. And there's just a huge value in reaching out early to those. I made probably 50 phone calls, probably left 30 messages, but had 20 conversations with people who appreciated hearing from me before an announcement, before a press conference. It gives them a great feeling of connectivity, right? It's as if they feel like they were in the hiring process, which is a really good position to be in as a new athletic director or new deputy or new coach. But then that's the donor, that's the external outreach. It's also really important for me that I reached out to our 16 head coaches, because when you're the new athletic director, there's just a lot of unrest amongst staff. And so probably the most key component to all of this is my assistant, who has been here through, I'm the fourth or fifth athletic director that she's trained to do the job. And so to reach out, touch base with my senior staff, and ironically, this was all on New Year's Eve for me, so I didn't have high expectations of getting any return text, but just making sure that I'd reached out to them and said, hey, this news is probably going to break tomorrow, and just touch base with the head coaches and senior staff as well.
Gosh, talk about, so I saw that you had started officially January 1.
Yes.
So like you actually did. So that's not just an on paper higher ed thing where we see people start in July, right?
Yeah.
So I bet that was one of your more interesting New Year's Eve that you had spent with your family.
It was madness, because I knew that I was a finalist. I was with Army at the Independence Bowl in Shreveport. We're going for our 12th win, which was a huge accomplishment and important to us. And my wife and I got on a bus from Shreveport to DFW, ironically, at the early morning hours of the day after the bowl game. And by the time we landed in Florida to reunite with our two kids, I had been offered this job. And we tried to keep it quiet until after the holiday, but Pete Thamel's really good at his job, and
Yeah.
gave me the courtesy call and said, hey, I'm going to go with this in about 20 minutes. And yeah, all hell broke loose, but for good reason.
Yeah, Thamel and College AD and D1 Ticker, I'm sure all were on it right away. Assess the whole department. Make the right decision. AD Vantage connects compensation, staffing, spending, budgeting, performance, contracts, and candidate intelligence, revealing relationships that siloed tools just cannot. Build your own watch list of coaches or administrators, create custom reports to compare, or just browse and compare when you have a thought or moment of curiosity. Visit athleticdirectorvantage.com for more info and a demo. The state, I've been driving around. We're talking about the places I've been, the places I'm going. I was also in Oklahoma. It's a big state, but there's also it's a crowded state of not just FBS schools, but even schools that kind of look and feel like a TCU. So whenever you're trying right now, whether it's corporate sponsors or just reaching out, I had mentioned new donors, potential donors that want to support the Horned Frogs, but even thinking corporately, how do you manage that? I'm guessing everything's bigger in Texas, they say, so I'm sure there's enough for everybody, but that's got to be a little competition there, a friendly competition maybe in this new model of athletics.
Yeah, and you're right. There's never enough for everybody, certainly not in the new landscape. And so what we've tried to do is maximize opportunities with current corporate sponsors, but then also, keeping the funnel full of potential new corporate sponsors. And, we want Fort Worth to be purple, and we want to be the University of Fort Worth. You're right. There is enough to go around. We've got SMU 25 miles down the road. We got North Texas 25 miles down the road. And we got Baylor down in Waco, about 80 miles from here. And so our strategy is to own Fort Worth and its surrounding areas, whether that's businesses that are owned by Duke graduates that have settled in Texas, adopt us as your team behind your team. But then also find where our donors are and where our graduates are, whether they've settled in Los Angeles or Columbus, Ohio, or Atlanta, Georgia. Are there opportunities there in this new world of NIL? One other thing that I think is really smart that Ryan Peck and his team have come up with is every recruit that comes in, we now ask them for 4 or 5 businesses in their hometown. I was a kid that grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I went to school in North Carolina. And even back then, I think had NIL existed, they could reach out to 4 or 5 business people in Cleveland who would have loved to have still had, made a footprint into North Carolina or ACC baseball in my case. So huge opportunities. And as you know, we're having to be more and more creative every day to try to keep up and hopefully get ahead.
So with this changing model, I joked when I got here that we talk about the transfer board, you kind of opted into this NIL and house settlement world. How many people thought you were crazy when you left Army to do this? But 2, what was your, I mean, that had to play in a big factor. And obviously you're not new to it because you hear everything, you talk, all your AD colleagues are dealing with it, but like that had to play a factor in the decision.
Yeah, and it was a tough decision, right? I mean, it's being at West Point, being in an academy is such a unique place. And candidly, I relied on two main conversations. One was with Chet Gladchuck, who was the AD at Navy, who's since retired, but he was at Tulane and he was at Boston College and made the decision to go to the Naval Academy, and that was where he wanted to be and ended his career there and did amazing things. And number two was Boo Corrigan, who was my predecessor at West Point, and I called Boo when I was interviewing for a Power Four job and just said, "Hey, knowing what you know now, would you do anything differently?" And he kind of talked me down from the ledge and said, "Kids are still great kids. The great majority of them still enroll, stay 4 years. You know, you get this clouded picture of college athletics, right? We have 500 student athletes here, and only 100 of them are football and basketball players, which leaves 400 others that are still pretty much the classic college student athlete." And so, not an easy decision to leave a place like West Point, where I did feel challenged, and I felt like I got better as a leader and developing character every day, just through osmosis. But I knew the longer that I stayed at an academy, the harder it would be to be able to explain that I did have a mastery of an understanding of NIL and what this rev share was and what the house settlement was. And I relied heavily on, Lead One as an organization, NACDA as an organization, to hear from my colleagues across the country who were in civilian roles, listening to what their frustrations were about NIL, listening to mechanisms or initiatives that they put in place that were working, so that when I interviewed for the job at TCU, I wasn't just kind of making stuff up. I was able to recite what I knew was working at a Duke or a Vanderbilt or Northwestern that I thought could work at TCU, and that certainly helped.
Game One is the preferred apparel and equipment provider of higher ed athletics. Is your uniform and apparel provider deal up soon? Considering your options? Do you like Under Armour, Adidas, Nike? Take your pick with Game One as your provider. Tim McMurray is a former college AD and understands your job. Visit the show notes to get in touch with Game One and Tim McMurray today. Theo seems to love it there. So he was on the podcast recently, as I told you, and so he's I'm sure he misses you, but I also think he loves it there. And I do wonder. He told me, I forget what they nicknamed the ADs there, and so were you glad to kind of remove that AD nickname?
Well, they name you, they number you.
Yeah.
So I was AD 30, he's AD 31. There's a romance to working at an academy, and what I love about Theo is, we work together in tandem to do some incredible things. I'm in this role because the job that Jeff Munkin did, and the job that Tom Theodorakis did, and the job that Dan McCarthy did, and others. But Theo getting the opportunity to move into that chair, he's made it his own. He's changed things that I put into place and made it even better than it already was. And I just love that about an opportunity. And Jason Donnelly's doing the same thing at Furman. When I left Furman, he came in and made it his own. And I benefit from having conversations, as I mentioned, with Boo Corrigan when I was trying to find my way at Army, and now here Jeremiah Donati, who's at South Carolina now, has taken every call that I've put to him, and because you still care about those places. Chris Delcani and I have talked about TCU, and that's over a decade ago when he was here, but he still wants the things that were special about TCU to continue, and that's what's great about this industry. At the core of what we're doing, we all want these institutions to keep getting better and better and better, and that's important to us.
Well, I interview a lot of athletic directors, so I understand the passion you all have for institutions, and it is uniquely American to have college sports, literally. We're the only ones that do it this way. There's been a lot of outside noise, I would argue, kind of overblown about this idea of outsiders from maybe professional sports or just business coming into the academy of higher education to do the jobs that you are doing, because historically college athletics was obviously slow to change because it is in higher education and there wasn't anything really forcing change. Some ADs, might not want to change, but they are evolving. And so I'm studying this in my dissertation specifically about the evolving position of the FBS athletic director. And in response to this perceived outside entity. So how do athletic directors yourselves, but also with your staffs, how do you more learn the professional sports, the business side that you can now apply to college athletics? Because I would argue that the political IQ you have to work at a university is much different than the private sector where you can make quick decisions and you can have a product line. You are stuck with your rules, your amount of teams, all that stuff, but you can then learn from them and apply it.
Yeah, and it's a challenge, and I've monitored the landscape too as a traditional athletic director candidate for the past 20 years. There is a little bit of, hey, if there's a job that you're interested in, and they hire somebody from the outside in the business world, and you show frustrations. But for me, it's just it's you have to understand the big picture and what the institution's looking for. And as I look at this new world that we're in, I'm unique in that I have a professional sports kind of background as a player, not as a front office person, but I understand the mechanics of it. And at the end of the day, whether you succeed or fail in your job may have nothing to do with your background. It may be personality, it may be alignment, it could be anything like that. It could just be, making bad choices. And so I think it's great for our industry. We sat in a room at the Fiesta Summit a couple of weeks ago, and I looked around, and there were, classic ADs that started in compliance and worked their way up over 15 years and earned that opportunity. And then there were others that ran businesses, and they all care about the outcomes, and that's graduating young people and the thought of fair play and how do we move forward as an industry right now. And so as I look at it, I have a skill set that's team related. I understand team building. I understand relationships. I understand how to manage down, manage up, be a good teammate to the chancellor, but also have other teammates, buy into the culture that we're trying to create. So I had to learn the business piece. And so I've leaned on trustees. I happen to work for a chancellor at TCU that is worked, as an entrepreneurship professor before becoming the chancellor here. He's Harvard Business School. He understands the business part. So I kind of compliment him, and he compliments me. Where I'm weak, he's strong, and where I have strengths to complement the athletics piece, as opposed to people that are coming in having been CEOs of companies. They understand the business piece and the up and out, looking into this new world that we're in, but they have to learn how to hire a soccer coach and how to build team unity. And so you certainly do that in the business world, but translating that to the athletics world has nuances. But good people, smart people, people of high character find their way.
And it's got to be fun in some ways too for you and your team to think about, like you had mentioned Ryan talking about asking each recruit about 4 businesses. There used to be all these almost like handcuffed to the traditional model, where now you can sit around a table and have ideation sessions with your staff or talk to colleagues in different regions about, we could try this, because it's not over commercialized, but you think uniform patches, for example. I always like to ask people about what they're doing with uniform patch thought processes. You really get to just try new things, and that's got to be sometimes exciting to, every day looks different. It can be frustrating, but you can also look at it glass half full and say, look, we get to try all these things and see if we want to do it or not.
You're exactly right. And, I think it's a great time to be a 25 to 30-year-old professional in this business, because you're not, the old system is not so ingrained in your brain that you have, paralysis by analysis, like so many people of my age, where it's just like, you've been beaten on the head with the NCAA rule book for so long. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. And almost overnight, the floodgates opened. And now that's where the outside business people are brilliant. I think, Brett Yormark, our commissioner, who came from Rock Nation and, was running an NBA franchise in Brooklyn, like, that's a really good example of someone who came into the industry at the right time, because he in his previous world, he didn't care about the NCAA rule book. And so, he had to feel his way and understand where does the MMR partners, inventory end, and where does mine begin. And I say the same thing to our marketing folks, which is, hey, let's try new things. Try until I literally pull you into my office and say, hey, that was a little bit over the line. So it's a fun time to be young, creative, and innovative.
This episode is sponsored by Pilytics. More money, less time, lower costs. Pilytics is an AI technology company dedicated to solutions that generate revenue, save you time, and reduce costs for universities campus-wide, including athletic departments. Increased donations, fast, effective targeting, improved performance. A custom platform designed to improve fundraising results in today's higher ed environment by fully leveraging all your data. Visit pilotics.ai today to learn more and request a demo. And that the last thing that reminds me of is, some people are not going to like the person, but Elon Musk is a brilliant mind. His the biography by Walter Isaacson, in that a big part of it is question everything, question every rule. But you show me a rule book, okay, I'm okay with it being a rule, but tell me why, tell me who came up with that rule and give me the context, and then push the limits to try something differently. And when I was reading that, a few years ago, I was like, this is basically college athletics now. It is, why did this rule make sense? Could it be changed? And it seems like your commissioner he's probably read that book and probably has the same approach.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, for years, we just thought, man, if we ever paid student athletes, like the world will end. Like this can't happen. We can't pay them money. And then we started paying them money, and it's like, well, okay, guess what? They're still going to class, and they're still listening to their coach, and they're still showing up, to lift weights, and all of these things. Whether it's paying the full cost of attendance or the Alston money, that we all thought, boy, this is going to be a real problem. Turns out, you can adapt.
Mike, thanks for having me, letting me come to campus, and you all have a beautiful place here. I know it's it's just a beautiful DFW area. I've been able to travel around, but really enjoyed my time here at TCU.
Well, we appreciate you coming, Travis. Go Frogs.